I cannot stress enough that economists everywhere tend to view free trade as a good thing. Now, however, many countries around the world can and do restrict in one way or another the free flow of goods and services between countries. Now, this is known as protectionism. This can take a few forms. We can have direct tariffs, which are simply taxes and duties on imports. We may impose quotas. Foreign currency controls are also possible. For instance, non-Indian nationals traveling into India cannot legally import any amount of rupees without clearance. Embargoes are economic sanctions in which there is a total government ban on certain imports or exports to specified countries. In the modern world, thanks to the help of the WTO, whose Uruguay round produced 22,500 pages of regulations regarding permitted and prohibited tariffs, protectionism has become creative. Procurement rules such as the Buy American Act of 1933, for instance, require federal contractors to give priority to tenders by US firms. This is not a tariff, but still protectionism nevertheless. Now, export subsidies are another way. In recent years, the US government has made annual outlays of over $1 billion in its Agricultural Export Enhancement Program, or EEP, as well as its Dairy Export Incentive Program, or DEIP. Of course, the EU's Common Agricultural Policy paid 1.0 billion euros in export subsidies in 2008, mostly to dump cheap milk powder, butter, and sugar in LDCs. Creative administrative barriers and safety regulations are another crafty way of sneaking protectionism past the GATT. The 1990s beef hormone dispute saw the EU banning North American beef containing artificial bovine growth hormones, now that's most of their beef, ostensibly to protect against mad cow disease. However, it kicked up a stink so bad that it reached the WTO's dispute settlement body and led to the authorization of $116.8 million in punitive tariffs by the US on EU exports. Now, whatever form they may take, tariffs are economically inefficient. Consider this diagram. Before the tariff, the world price is WP. The tariff, in effect, raises the price. From consumers, this affects a QD/QD1 fall in quantity demanded. The consumers lose TD/BWP in consumer surplus. Now, this is a welfare that is lost to society. However, this is not all a deadweight loss. The producers, who are now able to increase their quantity supplied QS to QS1, gain TCAWP in additional producer surplus. The government also collects CDFE in tariff revenue. Now, the remaining area, triangles ACE and DBF, represents the deadweight welfare loss to society because of this tariff. The same diagram actually applies to any form of a quota. If the government imposes an import quota of QS1 QD1, the effect will be equivalent to a tariff and will raise the price of the good to T. However, the tariff revenue CDFE becomes what is known as quota rent. This explains why countries like Japan often agree to a voluntary export restraint, or VER, mostly from the US, a seemingly suicidal move that slashes export earnings. However, in addition to saving face and avoiding a potentially devastating trade war, such VERs mean that the quota rent accrues to Japanese firms employing Japanese workers paid in Japanese yen that is then used to buy Japanese products in Japanese stores, triggering the multiplier effect. If the US was forced to impose a quota or tariff, the effect on output quantity would be identical, except the tariff revenue now goes directly to the US Treasury's coffers. And these are just the economic welfare effects of a tariff or a quota. Think of all the extra costs incurred in monitoring and administering the import controls. All of the border guards, the custom agents, the import middlemen, the lobbyists and the bureaucrats on Capitol Hill that protection keeps in business. The annual budget of US Customs and Border Protection alone is $11.84 billion last year, 50% of the budget of the US Department of Education.